But seriously, the greatest Phil Collins album of all time. And I'm willing to fight someone. I will stand by this. I'll fight you. Okay, so today we're going to review, but seriously, the fourth studio album from Phil Collins. I think I should know that. One of the things I want to talk about before we dive into this album is the album covers. What a great series. I mean, that's something that Phil Collins is known for, the handwriting. I love the consistency. I love that he did something different for so long, but yet kept it the same, with the handwriting always being the same, and then the looking into a different direction, but also having a different color scheme. So it was like black and white for Face Value. Then he introduced blue on Hello, and then red on No Jacket. And then this is kind of like a beigey color. But it's funny, they're all like on a black background, but they do have a color of some sort. Both sides came after this, was kind of creamy and white and looking in a different direction. Dance Into the Light, I always kind of bothered me. I mean, it's a great cover. It's actually a really great cover, but it always bothered me that he deviated. I think maybe he felt like both sides was not as commercially successful, so he wanted to show just kind of like a brighter and different side of Phil Collins, kind of like a way to reinvent himself with Dance Into the Light. We're not talking about that album. What am I doing? I always love the covers, and this is a great cover, and I'm glad he stuck with this for so long, and he went back to it on Testify. Here's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about the stats of this album. Then we're going to talk about the genre and the music of this album. Then we're going to go song by song through this record and talk about all the different songs on this record, even though we've talked about them so often. If you've watched my video on my ranking my favorite Phil Collins albums of all time, that I've put But Seriously at number 1. So I'm very excited to dive into this record and to explain why I think this is the best Phil Collins record and to talk about all the tracks. I know we have so many viewers who like this album, and there's some specific tracks on this album that I know are super meaningful to you. And we share a lot of similarities in what songs we adore. And we have some differences too. There's some songs on here that I'm not hugely in love with that I think might surprise you. First, let's talk about the stats. This came out in November 7th, 1989 in the US, and then November 24th, 1989 in the UK. You know what's so funny is they don't do that anymore. Since maybe about 2015, 2016, they came out with a universal album release day. It used to be Tuesdays in America and Friday in Europe, and now it's Fridays across the board. And it's funny that albums aren't released, a few weeks later in other countries, maybe physically, and obviously there's delays in pressing and manufacturing right now, and so that happens all the time. But digitally, of course, an album drops. It actually drops in like New Zealand first, and then a couple hours later in the rest of the world. But it's just interesting to think of like 3 whole weeks or 2 whole weeks from when the US got this record to when the UK got this record. And unless somebody like hopped a copy of it on a plane and shared it around, you would be basically waiting those extra 2 weeks if you were in the UK, which you probably hated. If you were around at that time, if that was you, what was that experience like? It's very interesting to me that they were able to withhold it for a couple of weeks in the UK, which of course now would never work. It went to number 1 in the US and in the UK for 15 consecutive weeks. Remember, this was post Buster and all the songs on Buster. It was post Invisible Touch, post Separate Lives. So this was really Phil Collins at his peak. And we know now it was his peak. We know now that commercially and being a relevant 30-year-old artist, he didn't get any higher than Invisible Touch with Genesis, and he didn't get any higher than But Seriously with Phil Collins' solo work. And so this was definitely, the Sirius tour was massive. I got to go to it when I was a little boy, much more handsome then. And this was the best-selling album in the UK in 1990, which is very cool. And Another Day in Paradise won a Grammy. So he had just won a Grammy for Album of the Year with No Jacket Required. And on the follow-up record with But Seriously, he won a Grammy for Another Day in Paradise, which was Record of the Year. Not Song of the Year, which is about the songwriting, but Record of the Year, which is the song plus the recording. So the entire listening experience. And Another Day in Paradise is a great track. What I think is so incredible about Phil Collins so many times throughout his career, and we've talked about this on the show, is this jarring left turn that he makes so many times in his career that surprises and delights the artists. And he did it with Genesis as well, but I really love it when he did it in his solo career. And I like to think about that moment, and we'll talk about it when we do a review on No Jacket Required, but I like to think about that moment when people heard No Jacket Required in the first beats of Sussudio after what was Hello, I Must Be Going, and a framework that he created on Face Value and Hello, I Must Be Going. And then he completely upsets that with a dance record. Well, the same thing would happen with But Seriously. But for him to do a more serious approach, to do more socially conscious lyrics, deeper love songs, not just the shallow love songs that are common in the 80s. And so to do a record that's more acoustic sounding, that just has overall more depth sonically and lyrically, that must have been jarring for people expecting to hear No Jacket Required or Invisible Touch Part 2. And so this was another bold move for Phil Collins to do something musically and lyrically and thematically that's completely different. And it's another risky move. And it's one of the reasons why I defend both sides, which we're not talking about today, but I can't help but talk about all the records in sequence. But it's another reason why I defend both sides, because both sides was another jarring left turn after this big, massive album. And it didn't pay off quite as much as No Jacket Required. That left turn paid off, and as this left turn paid off. And so this was a really, really interesting move for Phil to do something so deep and so moving. I think the songs overall are better than No Jacket Required and anything he's done before. The songwriting on this record is unparalleled. It's just incredible. And the things that he does with the horns and how the horns take part in the melody on Hanging Long Enough and on Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. Such a great record. Less vocal effects, too, intentionally on this record than on Genesis records and on previous Phil Collins records, which is really cool. Really a stripped back approach, even though it's quite a big production. We're going to talk about this one point in this entire review. We're going to talk about it on many songs, but there is this undefinable genre of this album. And you do hear the urban and the Motown influences when we hear the horns from Earth, Wind, and Fire, but we also hear these screeching Daryl electric guitars, which is incongruent with some of these horns and the Motown beats that we're hearing. And we're hearing rock music, and we're hearing the piano ballads, and we're hearing all of this and jazz influences and all of the influences of Phil Collins coming together. Remember when I talked about Face Value, I talked about all of the influences throughout his life and how those were represented by individual songs. Well, this is just kind of a melting pot of all of these influences that has created this sound that we don't hear anywhere else. And I think But Seriously is just so unique in that there's these drum machines, and then there's real drums, and then there's real horns, and then there's blues guitar, and then there's classical guitar, and then there's gated reverb drums. And there's all of these really interesting sounds happening that are making But Seriously distinctly unique and creating this unique sound that is But Seriously. And that's what I love about this record so much. We're going to hear it in so many times on the record where there's a marriage of a drum machine with real drums. And it's really the only time and the last time that he really does this is where we hear those super clean clavs and kick drums that we hear on songs like Do You Remember? And That's Just the Way It Is. Then we hear that married with, big cymbal rolls and real drums. And I think that's just what makes this record also really special from a drumming perspective, is getting to hear really clean organic sounds, but also those really clean analog drum machine sounds. Again, what makes this record so special. Let's dive into the tracks. We're going to go track by track. I had to grab my CD copy of But Seriously because the track listing on the original vinyl is different than the track listing on the CD and on the cassette and what we have on digital platforms now. So let's go off with number one, Hanging Long Enough. I've always loved this song. I've always thought this song came second place to Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. I've been warming up to it. Not warming up to it. I mean, I think it's fantastic, but it's actually been moving itself into like my favorite songs of all time from Phil because I've been listening to some of the live versions, and especially on the Dance Into the Light tour, they did Hand in Hand, and then I think it went straight into Hanging Long Enough, which is just really, really powerful. And I just find that song just sounds really, really great. And the horns, I mean, to me, it's a sister song to Something Happened on the Way to Heaven, but it's completely unique in its own way. Just a great opener. Really, really great opener.
I totally forgot to mention this part on Hanging Long Enough that I love so much. It's called the orchestra hit, which was kind of a big synthesizer sound in the 90s. It was a digital sound, and it sounds like this. Kind of funny, eh? See how it's like an orchestra all hitting at once?
One One of the interesting things, I mean, I absolutely love the first 5 tracks on this record. To me, it just completely flow beautifully. But it is kind of interesting that you do this big opener with Hanging Long Enough, and then you go with That's Just the Way It Is, which is a really good song. It's a social justice song, beautiful drum machines happening there, incredible, really, really beautiful, a drum roll that comes in at some point, a really unique bridge, such a great tune. But it's also, then it goes into a love song, Do You Remember? That's Just the Way It Is and Do You Remember are 2 of my favorite Phil Collins songs of all time. Especially Do You Remember? Absolutely love that song. But it is a little interesting in the track order that you would have a big tune, and then you would have these 2 tunes that are super mid-tempo, and they actually sound very similar. Even the beginnings of the songs sound similar. So I found that kind of weird that they would put them like that. But then again, it could also be weird if you did Hanging Long Enough, That's Just the Way It Is, Something Happened on the Way to Heaven, Do You Remember? Because that's similar in itself. Big horn song, mid-tempo, big horn song, mid-tempo. So it's not a huge deal for me, but it was always just kind of weird that those 2 songs were back to back. But Do You Remember is great. Do You Remember is great on the Serious Hits tour, but it's one of his great hit songs. Real quick before we move on, I want to talk about the singles for this, okay? Really quickly, Another Day in Paradise was the first single. I'm getting this from Wikipedia. It was released in October 23rd, 1989. So about maybe a couple weeks before the album came out. I Wish It Would Rain Down was the next single that came out in January of the following year. Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. All of these songs are really good, but they're not as like clear-cut singles as something like Misunderstanding or You Can't Hurry Love or Every Day, or songs that would just be clearly a pop hit. That's what makes Another Day in Paradise really special, that it did so well, is because it's not clearly a pop hit. Maybe in the early 90s when things were getting a little dark, maybe it would fit better then, but certainly not today. Something Happened on the Way to Heaven was the 3rd single that came out in April. Do You Remember, the song we were just talking about, is the 4th single and came out also in April, a couple weeks after. I Bet You Something Happened on the Way to Heaven didn't do very well, so that they followed it up really quickly with Do You Remember? That's Just the Way It Is came out a few months later in July. And then in September, Hanging Long Enough came out as a single. I don't know how individually all those singles did. I probably should have checked. It's interesting that they did so many singles from the album. And I don't think any of those songs, aside from I Wish It Would Rain Down, Something Happened, Another Day in Paradise, but even just pretty much Another Day in Paradise and I Wish It Would Rain Down have kind of become like the big hits of Phil Collins. Then you start to get those other singles I think they become a little bit more deeper cuts. They aren't known as well by the general public. You don't hear them on the radio as much, especially songs like That's Just the Way It Is and Hanging Long Enough. Number 4 is Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. I've talked about this song when we did my favorite songs of Phil Collins. This song, every day that I hear this, and I pretty much hear it almost every day that I hear Something Happened on the Way to Heaven, it goes up higher on my list of favorite Phil Collins songs. It just keeps getting better and better. That double hit when it goes into the verse is just so powerful. The way that he uses the horns on this record is better than I've ever heard it. Better than when they used them in Genesis that one time. Even better than Sussudio, although the horns on Sussudio are incredible. Better than he used them in a more Motown fashion on his first 2 records. Better than the horns that we would hear in Dance into the Light. It's just really, really great horns. Okay, and then Colors. I did a song review about Colors. Colors started off as a song called Hymn, which was like a very sad piano song about all the bad news that you hear on TV. And then the second half of Colors was also another song idea that he combined, very, very similar to what they would do in the writing process of Genesis, when they would take little bits of song ideas from different songwriters in the band and combine them and make a longer song. And so Colors is a very long song. And so that's what makes it long, is it's essentially 2 songs that he had in the demo process that he put together. And such a great idea. I mean, it just really flows well. You have this beautiful intro piano song that's just really nice, and then something builds, and then that drum roll into the song. It just makes it super, super powerful. I love Colors. It's a rare deep cut. You didn't hear it live very often. I would say you don't hear it on the radio very often, and most fans aren't familiar with it, but it's such a great song. My opinions on I Wish It Would Rain Down are different than most of you. I've I find this song to be a real slogger. Like it just really drags the album down. He never played it on the Serious Hits tour because I remember that they debuted, well, I don't know if they debuted, but I remember that they played the music video as kind of the opening act. So before the band came out, they played the music video on the big screens. So it wasn't, I don't know why, if it's the second single, why it wasn't played on the show. Maybe he just thought it would slow down the show too much. I mean, he already had a lot of slow tunes on that tour. And so, this is a long song and it's not mid-tempo. It's getting into ballad territory because it's so slow. So I've just never been crazy about it. I'm not a blues fan. And so this would be his blues attempt. It doesn't stand out from the record, which is good. It fits into the vibe. But I'm just not a fan of this. And I know that is polarizing to a lot of people because when I listed my favorite songs, I asked all of our viewers to list their favorite Phil Collins songs. And most people, or quite a lot of people, included I Wish It Would Rain Down on their list. And so I know my opinion differs, but I always find like I just blow through the first 5 songs on this album and just completely blows me away 30, 40, where are we at? 40 years later. And it just completely blows me away. And when I get to I Wish It Would Rain Down, it just feels like it puts the brakes on the record. And I just feel like things have been flowing so nicely that this long kind of drawn out tune always slows things down for me. Now we're moving into the kind of the second half of the record and we go into Another Day in Paradise. And Another Day in Paradise isn't in my top 20 Phil Collins songs, but I have no disdain for it at all. I absolutely think it's a brilliant song. I never skip it. It's cool. It's a really great lyric. It's one of those times where a songwriter comes up with a really clever lyric. It's just another day in paradise for you and me. And so when in the juxtaposition of thinking of paradise and homelessness, its song about homelessness is called Another Day in Paradise. And it shows how we take things for granted, that we're living in a paradise, even if we think our life sucks. And that's just a really powerful way to communicate something. So this is actually, I think it's great that he won Record of the Year. I think he should have won Song of the Year as well. But it's actually one of Phil's best lyrics, that it just kind of describes something super common in a really new way that gives you a new perspective on things. And so it's what makes Another Day in Paradise such a profound song. Even if I don't get up and dance to this song, I don't sing along at the top of my lungs. Maybe sometimes I do, but there's no denying it's a really powerful tune. Heat on the Street, every time it comes on, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about this tune. It's another social justice song, and I love it. It's a great use of horns, and it kind of pairs nicely, right? Like you have Something Happen on the Way to Heaven, Hanging Long Enough, and Heat on the Street all kind of work together, and it's nice that they're spread out throughout the record, and those 3 songs give this album a certain identity. So you have these big popping tunes, and then these kind of more meaningful, deeper, darker tunes, what give the album a But Seriously vibe. Another deep cut that is rarely talked about, although some of you did mention it on your favorite list, is All of My Life. And now this is a kind of a gospel song and sort of similar to I Wish It Would Rain Down in a way, but it's a little bit faster in tempo. But All of My Life is one of my favorite tunes. It's such a deep cut that you don't hear it live very often, if ever. I don't know if he ever played it live. Maybe he did on Both Sides tour. Correct me if I'm wrong. But it's a really, really great song. It's a song about his dad. It's about the times that he wished he had spent with his dad. Is it a copy of The Living Years from Mike and the Mechanics? I kind of feel like it is. I feel like, The Living Years is, one of the best written songs of the past 100 years. The Living Years is a phenomenal song. And it's about wishing that Mike had spent more time with his dad when he was alive. And All of My Life is kind of the same way. It's about, I was upstairs listening to records, you were downstairs watching TV, and it's like, I want to, take a drink with you now, and I want to spend time with you now that you're gone. And so I thought that was kind of, there is similarities to The Living Years, but this song is beautiful. Musically, it's absolutely beautiful. It's completely different from The Living Years. The Living Years is a big, massive Coldplay U2 style song, whereas this is just a humble attempt to connect with his dad. And I love the gospel choir too. That's completely different from the rest of the album, but for some reason, part of what brings all these songs together on But Seriously is just how all of these songs are really big, really big in their own way. Another Day in Paradise is really big. Something Happened on the Way to Heaven is really big. I want to talk about Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. This is a great song. It's a really, really great song. I never skip it. I think it's really fun, but I don't think it belongs in this album. Tell me if you agree or not, but I think this should have been left off the album. In fact, Phil Collins agrees because they left it off of the vinyl when they did the original vinyl pressing, not the repressing. Can you see that? But they did it. They left it off of the original pressing on vinyl just because they were running out of, the album is so long, they were running out of space on a single disc. They did double disc when they did the reissues in 20, but they left it off. And I really think they should have left it off for 4 reasons. Number one, it would just trim back the album a little bit. It would make the album a little bit shorter. And I think it's important to Kill Your Darlings. Number 2 is that it creates this sort of jarring transition from into father to son, which I just think is kind of weird. Number 3 is they already left it off of the vinyl and not the CD and tape. Why don't you just leave it off the whole project altogether? And finally, I think it breaks up this trilogy of songs that are super meaningful and super beautiful. All of My Life, Father to Son, and Find a Way to My Heart. I think those songs all flow together. You have All of My Life about his father, you have Father to Son, which is about his son, and then you have Find a Way to My Heart, which is this kind of mysterious friendship song or love song or non-romantic love song. And so I think those songs kind of all blend together. Maybe he was thinking, I actually need to break those songs up. And so let's put a little upbeat instrumental. I'm sure that song was just a goof off in the studio between the drums and the horns. It's a fantastic song, but I think there's a lot of reasons why it should have been left off the record. Next is Father to Son, another great tune that often gets overlooked because of some of the other kind of slower tunes that he has, but a really beautiful song that he wrote for his son. I like it a lot more than Please Don't Ask, which is similar in vein, right? It's kind of a message to his ex-wife and talking about his kids a little bit. But from a parenting perspective, I think it's a really cool track. It's a track from a dad to a son. That's why it's called Father to Son. And I love it. I love it so much. It's really good. There's an interview when this album came out where he talked about this song on a TV show. Interviewer actually asked him about this track because it is a really special track and we don't get to hear Phil talk about it too much. And we don't get to hear it live very often. So it's a really great track. The final song on But Seriously is Find a Way to My Heart. Now, if you know me, you know, if you've watched this channel, you know Find a Way to My Heart is my favorite Phil Collins song. I've said that before. I don't think I put it on my top best Phil Collins songs because we were doing the top best Phil Collins songs overall and we're trying to be a little bit more objective. But when I'm being subjective, Find a Way to My Heart is a fantastic song. It's fantastic closer. It flows really well from father to son. It's a really long tune. It's treading completely new waters. The other thing I think about Find a Way to My Heart, and I don't really know what the lyrics truly mean, but it feels like a non-romantic love song, which is actually one of the hardest songs to write. Think of Everybody Loves the Sunshine or What a Wonderful World. A non-romantic love song is something that is just talking about love itself, talking about friendship, talking not specifically parenting, but just about those feelings of connecting with people or connecting with nature, or connecting with the world. Writing a non-romantic love song for a songwriter is really hard to do. And when you do it right, it opens you up to so many different sync licensing opportunities. It connects with a much wider audience. It relates to men and women equally. It relates to people who are in a relationship or not in a relationship. And so Find a Way to My Heart is, for me, is about that. It could be a father to a daughter. It could be about somebody who is past and is in the afterlife. It could be about somebody looking for a romantic partner. So there's just so many meanings behind this song, potential meanings behind this song that makes it so incredible. The bridge is out of this world. I wasn't a huge fan of the way they did it on the Both Sides tour, on the Dance Into the Light tour. It just was like, it took away from it. To me, this was like more of an organic song and just a little bit more laid back and had like a slow build to it. To me, they just made it a little bit too like poppy on the Dance Into the Light tour. It's good to hear it, but I wish they had played it on the But Serious tour. I wish they kind of closed with it sort of like as a faux encore maybe, and then come back out for a couple other tunes. I love this song. I love this album. One of the things I forgot to mention when we were talking about Hanging Long Enough, and we were talking about Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. And I sort of touched on it when it comes to the genre of this record is like, what is the genre of this record? I mean, we don't know. We don't know if it's rock. We don't know if it's Motown. We don't know if it's pop. We don't know if it's gospel or blues. And I think that's what makes this record so special for me is I've been listening to this now for over 30 years and I still don't know. I still don't know what I'm hearing. There's these super big moments. And of course it's pop because it's Phil Collins. So it gets filed in the pop section. But, you know, if this was a no-name artist and you were listening to this, what section of the record store would you put this in? Because you hear these big horns, but then you hear these screeching guitars where the distortion is fading out on the first track. And then you hear these ambient sounds on Father to Son and on Find a Way to My Heart. And then you know, these gospel and blues songs like I Wish It Would Rain Down and All of My Life. And so that's what I love so much about this record. Do you like But Seriously? Where does it rank for you? What is your favorite song? I want to know two things. You can leave these in the comments. I want to know what your favorite song for But Seriously is. I really would love to know where your top three in order. And then I want to know where this ranks for you. You know, some people it's number one, and I'm in that camp. Some people it's in their top three, and other people put it way down at the bottom. They're not crazy about it. And I think there's some people who just didn't like the direction Phil was going, but it's a powerful record. Thanks for watching.